I'd like to thank you for joining us for this study in Hebrews chapter 11 that we are continuing as we look to the different people in this chapter that is considered the chapter of faith. And as we look at how each of these individuals are listed, and we're talking about specific individuals and how this applies to our life and how we can gain from it. The ones that we'll be looking at this evening are found in chapter 11 of Hebrews, verses 20 and 21. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped leaning upon the top of his staff. These gentlemen that are mentioned here, we are not, if we need to remember one of the things, we're not very far removed in generation-wise from Abraham. You have Abraham, you have Isaac, you have Jacob, then you have Joseph, and then as we'll see, the blessing passes on to Ephraim. And so really we're not too many generations actually removed from the promises that are made to Abraham and how important that is in what we're talking about here. We want to look first of all at the blessings of Isaac, Jacob, Esau, and the story that goes with that. As it says here, that by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of, that Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things to come. To really understand this story, we have to go back a ways to understand what it's talking about here. And so let's turn to Genesis, the 25th chapter. In Genesis, the 25th chapter, starting with verse 21, it says this. We see that Isaac has taken a wife. The problem is, as in the case was with Abraham, Isaac's wife is unable to bear children. And at this time, it says in verse 21, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So we see at the start here that Isaac and Rebekah, they have children, they have twins, and this plays an important part in, because as the patriarchal lines passed down, we know that it was the importance of the firstborn that was going to receive the largest amount of the blessings, and the things that were going to come about would be through the eldest of the family. And so we have 2 children here being born. And of course, the eldest going to be the one that is born first, and then followed by the second. But as she is expecting these children, she inquires of the Lord, why are these things like they are? And verse 23 is very important in that he says, there are 2 nations in thy womb. And he says there's 2 manner of men that are going to be born of you. But the most important part is when it tells her that the younger will be over the older. So this is a promise. This is something that she's told, and I'm sure this is something that she remembers as time goes on, as these young men are growing. This idea of that the younger will be over the older. And this goes against all that they would normally do, or that all that would be thought of during their time, during these generations, that the older should be the one who has the prominence, the place of authority and power. And yet she's been told, even before they're born, that the younger will have that place. And as we look on in the verses here, it talks about as they start to grow. In verse 20, starting in verse 27, it says, "And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man to the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from..." So we see as these two young men grow, as often happens sometimes in the family, the parents have a favorite. And we see that Isaac, his favorite is Esau, and because Esau is a man of the woods, he's a hunter, he's a man of the fields. He's kind of that what we think of today maybe as he's kind of that man's man. Rebekah, on the other hand, says that she loves Jacob, and Jacob is seems to be the quieter man, the man of the house, the man of being at home, and so they have their favorites. And this is going to play a part in what is coming on. As they grow older, there comes a time now where Isaac is growing older in age, and he knows he's coming to the end of his life. But let me remind you, Rebekah knows of the promise that has been made into her, that the younger will be over the older. And I'm sure also because of this, I'm sure this, whether it be through Rebekah or whether through God himself, I also know that Isaac, I'm sure, understands and has been told the same thing. So as the years have passed, this is not something that's brand new to them. This is not something that they don't understand, because it is proclaimed to them even before the birth. So as that time passes on, we come to a point now where Isaac knows he is coming towards the end of his life. Now, as chapter 25 is wrapping up, what we see the start of this idea that Jacob is going to be over his brother Esau. We see that played out in a story here that we're very familiar with. And we see that Esau has, and this is the last part of chapter 25 of Genesis, Esau has been out hunting in the fields, and he comes in and he is, as we would say, he comes in and he is famished. He's just exhausted. And as he comes in, he sees, this is starting in verse 29, and Jacob had made some pottage, and Esau came in from the field, and he was faint. And he said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, that thou some of that pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day your birthright." So Esau comes in, and we see what is about to happen is a start of what has already been foretold in the scripture. That Esau comes in and he's famished from his hunt. He's been out all day, and he comes in and he's, as we said, he's famished. He's hungry, and he comes in, and Jacob has been cooked, has some pottage there, has some food ready. And he says, "Please give me some of that, because I'm about to faint. And matter of fact, we'll see, he'll go on and he'll describe it as that I'm about to die." And so Jacob says to him, and why this is on Jacob's mind, I don't know. But Jacob says, "I tell you what, I will give you some. But today it will have a cost. And the cost is, sell me your birthright." And I don't know just exactly how hungry Esau is, but it doesn't seem to take him very long to say, "Well, what good is my birthright if I starve to death? I'm so hungry that I'm about to die. So what good is it going to do me if I have a birthright if I die before I can receive that birthright? So yes, I'll sell you my birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die. What profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, and Jacob here is trying to show that he's serious about this. This is not something that he's just saying offhand. And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he swore unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. One of the things that as a side note, one of the things I think we can learn when we look at this story, Esau comes in, he's famished, and I know all of us have had points in our lives where we exaggerated to the point of wanting to get something, or trying to exaggerate to the point of trying to show how extreme something is to us. I remember as a young boy, one time, my family, growing up on the farm, we were down in what we called the hayfield down in the bottom. And the hayfield down in the bottom is about as far as you could go on our property, and it was a long ways from the house, and it was across the creek, and had a big hayfield there. And we were out there one day, and it was one of those July, August type of days in Oklahoma where the sun was just beating down, and it was extremely, extremely hot. And one of the things that is the lifesaver when you were working in the hayfield was we always had a big water jug sitting over on the truck. Well, it come to the point of day that we were working in the hayfield, and I went to the water jug to get something to drink. Well, when we were working in the hayfield, I have two brothers, and usually a lot of times in the hayfield there was myself, my two brothers, my father, and quite often my grandfather was working with us also. And this happened to be a day that he was working with us. I went to the truck, and I lifted up the water jug and took the top off of it to get me some water, and there was no water. The jug was empty. We weren't through with the day. It was in the evening, but I knew we had several more hours to go, and here was no water. And I was thirsty. Well, I don't know whether it was so much thirsty or so much, maybe at the time it may have been that I wanted to get out of some of the work. But I stood there and I looked across the creek there, and I looked up to the hill towards where our house was, and it wasn't so far that you couldn't walk or do that distance. And so I looked at my grandfather and I said, there's no water. And I said, I'm going to the house. I'm going to go up to the house and get some water. And he said, no, we've got work to do. We need to stay here. And then I said, like Esau would have done, I said, but grandfather, I am dying of thirst. I'm going to die if I don't get something to drink. Of course, the truth of the reality is that I wouldn't have died, because I stayed there and I didn't die. I survived through the day. And my grandfather looked at me, I always remember, and he said, if this is as thirsty as you ever get in your life, count yourself blessed. And I remember that quite often, of him saying that. But the truth of the matter was, as much as I thought I was going to die of thirst, I didn't die of thirst. I made it through the day without going to the house and getting any water. And I can see Esau coming in, and I can see him being famished. I can see him being extremely hungry, and I understand that. But I also understand that it's not that Esau has gone day and day. This is not like it's the second or third day that Esau has had without food. And I'm sure he was a well-fed young man. And yet he comes in, and his idea is that I'm going to starve to death if I don't get something to eat, and get something to eat right now. And when his brother makes the offer of, yes, I'll give you something to eat, but you'll have to buy it with your birthright. Give it to me your birthright. He says, okay. One of the things I want us to understand is, and when it talks about saying that he despised, the scriptures talk to us and says he despised his birthright. The idea of that he did not take into account the importance of his birthright or what his birthright really meant. One of the things that we need to understand about the birthright of during this day and time was that the one who had the birthright, when you received the birthright, you had the authority of the Father. You received the authority of the Father. So as time went and as these generations will continue to go, we know during this patriarchal time that the patriarch, the head of the family, he has all authority. He's the leader, he's the judge, he's the one who is the spiritual leader. He speaks for God. So one, you have the authority of the Father. At the death of the Father, you also receive a double portion of all physical property that is of the Father's. And then thirdly, you function as the domestic, as we would say, you're the priesthood. You are the religious leader of the family. And so what Esau is so flippantly is willing to give away, he is willing to give away those things that give him authority over the family. He is willing to give away those things which would have given him a double portion of the physical things of this earth. And he is also giving away his ability to function as the religious head of the family as the patriarch. And it seems that he doesn't give this much thought, and he gives it away, as we quite often talk about, that he gives it away for a bowl of stew or a bowl of pottage, as if it was nothing. And quite often, that's one of the things that we do as we look at these stories. One of the things that we ask and that we want to get out of this is the idea of what implications do these stories have for you and I? And very much the implication here is that quite often we trade the things that are of great value for things of much lesser value. When we read through the scriptures and we have an understanding of the scriptures, we know that the stuff that it talks about in the scriptures that we are striving for are those things of a spiritual nature. And that those things of a spiritual nature will not only be of this life, but they are also of the life to come, and they are eternal. We know in the scriptures that it talks about the things of this earth will not last and that they will pass away. That there will be they are finite. They will have an end to them and they will not last. And yet quite often the people of this world are willing to trade that which is eternal, those things that are of greater blessing, they are willing to trade those for things that are temporary and of such minor significance compared to those of great value. And here he was willing to trade what should have been held to him as the eldest. It should have been held in high esteem, knowing that one day he would be stepping up to take the place of his father, both in leadership, both physical leadership and also in spiritual leadership. And yet he is willing to trade it for a bowl of pottage at the time. And with this, we see again the coming about of what we know has already been prophesied and has been told, that the younger will supplant or be higher than the elder. One of the things that he also not thinking about is, like as we started out, we are only 3 generations now removed from the promise that has been given to Abraham about his descendants being like the sands of the seashore, and that all nations would be blessed through his descendants. We're only 3 generations removed from that. You've got Abraham, you've got Isaac, and then Jacob. So you're only a couple of generations removed. And so because of that, along with this birthright, along with this spiritual leadership that we mentioned, you also have this idea with the spiritual leadership comes, he also is the one who will receive the promise that God has made through Abraham. That now will be through Jacob. He is also will be receiving of the covenant that was made with Abraham and the promise of the seed that would come through Abraham's descendants that would be a blessing to the world. And I'm sure at the time that Esau, when he sat down, Esau didn't sit down and say unto himself, what all am I putting at risk by selling my birthright? And quite often that's what we do. We don't ask ourselves, what am I putting at risk to obtain this physical thing? What am I putting at risk? What am I willing to sell for this physical thing? We don't look beyond the moment or the time that we're caught up in, and we don't understand the consequences of how far those consequences lead down the line. In Hebrews chapter 12, just the chapter after we talk about the chapter of faith, in Hebrews chapter 12, one of the things that it talks about is this very idea, and is that the writer of Hebrews is trying to get the people to understand that they have been given so much more. Hebrews also talks as Christ as being uses the terms like the better high priest, the better interceder, the intercessor, the better sacrifice, all these things that are better than what we have. And he's saying, don't risk all of that. All these things that are better, don't risk it for those things that are in the world. Then you'd find that in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 14 through 17. It talks about what we are willing to risk, that sometimes we are willing to gain, which is that which is much less, at risk of losing that which is much greater. He says in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 14 through 17, he says, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person, and he actually used the example of what we're talking about now. And he says, as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know how that afterwards he would have inherited the blessing. He was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. And that's going to bring us to the main idea of the blessing being passed on here. In Genesis starting in chapter 27, verses 1 through 5, starting with verses 1 through 5, we see that Isaac calls in Esau, and Isaac knows he is about to come to the end of his life. And he actually makes the statement, he says, I don't know when I'm going to die. So since I don't know when I'm going to die, he realizes this is an appropriate time, or at least he feels like life is going to be short. He feels this is an appropriate time to pass on the blessing. Now, one of the things I want to remind you of is, surely Isaac remembers what was told them preceding the birth of his sons, that the younger would serve the elder. And so he says unto Esau, he says, Esau, do this for me. Go out into the fields and hunt, and bring back and prepare for me a stew like you fixed that I enjoy so much. And if you'll do that, I can eat it, and then upon eating that, then I can give you your blessing. And so the plan is put into the works for Esau to go out hunting, bring back, prepare for his father some food so that his father may eat that. And he's told him, after I've done that, then I'm going to give you your blessing. One of the things we need to understand about the blessing is when these patriarchs, when they were at the end of their lives, and we see it quite often in the scriptures, when they were at the end of their lives and they called in their children and they gave their blessings, they were not just speaking as a father, saying, this is what I hope this is what will be best for my children. When these men are, during this period of time of the patriarchs, when these men are speaking, they are speaking what God is foretelling through them of what's going to happen. And so they are, for all practical purposes, they are a prophet. They are saying this is what will happen in ages to come. And so they're speaking for God in his behalf. And so that's what is about to happen. And so Esau goes out to hunt. And in so doing, while he's saying this to Esau, Rebekah has overheard it. And we've already read that we know that Isaac loves Esau and Rebekah loves Jacob, and there's a division there. And Rebekah has heard this. And I don't know that we can read in between the lines, I'm not sure, but we know that Rebekah understands what has already been told unto her. And maybe she sees now what is about to happen may in some way take away from what God has already told her is going to happen. But Rebekah takes it upon herself to formulate a plan to do something about that. And she calls Jacob in and she says, Jacob, do what I tell you to do. And she tells him what's going on. Your father has sent Esau out to hunt, and when he comes back, he's going to fix him some food, and then he's going to give him a blessing. I want you to go out and I want you to take 2 goats. And I want you to bring them unto me, and I will fix for your father what it is that he likes. And I want you to present it unto him, and so that you may receive the blessing. And so there's the deception that is being done here on Rebekah's part. And Jacob at first is hesitant to do it because he says, hey, Mom, because of what is going on, you need to understand, Father is going to know there's a difference. And we know at this time that his eyesight is extremely poor. And we see that from the text. And he says, but he's going to know that it's not Esau, because Esau and I are so different. We're so different from the very time when they were born. He says, Esau is a man of the field, and Esau is a hairy man. He will feel me, and he will know that it's not Esau. And he says, because of that, said instead of giving me a blessing, he's going to curse me because I'm trying to deceive him. And Rebekah says, listen, if there's going to be a curse, you let that curse be upon me. You just do as I tell you to do. And so he does what his mother tells him to do. He goes out and he takes 2 goats and he brings in, and she starts fixing some food for him. And then the idea that Jacob has brought up is that he's not as hairy as his brother. She takes goat skins and she puts them on the backs of his hands, and she puts goat skin up on the back of his neck. She also dresses Jacob in some of Esau's clothing. And all of us will have to admit, we know that touch and smell are very strong sensations to us. There is, all of us in our lives, there are certain smells that if we're walking through a store or we're walking into someone's house, there are certain smells that when we have those smells, it automatically brings to mind some person, an individual, a place, something. And we know, even scientists will tell you that smell is an extremely important in memory recall and helps recall things. And so he has the skins on his hands. He has the skin on the back of his neck. He's now wearing his brother's clothing, and he takes the food into his father. He goes into his father and he says, Father, here am I. And his father says, because obviously the voice, as his father's going to say later, the voice doesn't match him. He says, well, who is it? And Jacob says, it is your firstborn Esau, and I have done as you have told me, and I've brought it into you. And he says, draw closer unto me. And we know that Isaac is concerned, that he's confused, because he even says as Jacob comes in, he feels Jacob's hands, and he feels the hair on the back of his hands and the hair on the back of his neck, and he says, this feels like Esau, but it's not the voice of Esau. And even at that, he's somewhat confused. And then he takes of the food and he eats of it. And then he does like he says he would do. After he has eaten, he asks his son to come close unto him. Starting in chapter 27, starting in verse 18, he says, as he came unto his father and said, my father, he said, here am I. Who art thou? And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau thy firstborn. I have done according to thou hast bidst me to do. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat. Isaac said unto his son, how is it that thou hast found it so quickly? Well, the Lord brought it to me. Come near that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went unto Isaac his father, and he felt him, and he said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy as his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. And he said, thou art my son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, bring it near to me, and I will eat my son's venison, and my soul shall be blessed. And he brought it near to him, and he did eat, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said unto him, come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near, and he kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment. And he blessed him, and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field, which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore God gave, so now he's going to start the blessing. He's fully convinced now. This feels like my son. He smells like my son. He's given me the food that I wanted, and so now he's going to bestow upon him the blessing as he said he would. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and the plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that cursed thee, and blessed be he that blesses thee. And so Isaac gives the blessing that he had intended to give to Esau, he now gives to Jacob. And as you would expect, he's saying that, look, you're going to do well. The earth is going to bless you with dew. You're going to live off the fatness of the earth. You are going to be a great ruler. Your brothers are going to bow down to you. Other nations are going to bow down to you. And go so far as to say and that the Lord will bless those who bless him, and he will curse those who curse him. And so he receives this blessing. And again, the reminder is that he is speaking on God's behalf of things to come. And we see that he leaves and he goes out from his father. And it's as the scriptures say in verse 30, and it came to pass as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. So one brother has just barely left the room when the other brother comes in. And of course, Esau has no idea what has happened. And Esau comes in, he says, Father, here am I. And he says, who is this? He said, well, it's your son Esau, and I've brought to you what you want. And Isaac says, well, who is it that was here? Verse 32, and Isaac, his father, said unto him, who are you? And he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly and said, who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him. yea, and he shall be blessed. Isaac, what really Isaac is saying is, who was it that was here? He said, because I've already blessed him. And Isaac understands the finality of the blessing that he has given. Even if he doesn't know who it is that he gave it unto, he knows that it is the will of God. He doesn't say, well, wait a minute, that was done on falsehood. That was done through deception, and that I will give you the blessing because that other is null and void. It was done through deception, so it doesn't count. And so now I'll give to you the blessing that was meant for you. And when he says, I have eaten all before thou camest, and have blessed him, and he shall be blessed. Isaac realizes he has done something that cannot be undone. For as a prophet, as the spiritual leader of the family, he, whether he knew it or not, in speaking for God, he has given the blessing where it belonged. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, Thy brother came in with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And he said, Is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He has taken away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? You see a young man that appears at this time to be very distraught. His blessing is gone. And I guess one of the things that I've at this point, I almost feel sorry for Esau in that when he hears this, it says he was exceeding bitter cry. He's pouring himself out. Bless me, even me also, my father. In verse 37, and Isaac answered and said unto him, Esau, behold, I have made him thy lord, and all of his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice, and he wept. Quite often in our lives, there are things that we do that have repercussions that are far-reaching. And though we may be extremely bitter and remorseful and sorrowful for the things that we've done, quite often the consequences cannot be undone. We know quite often in our own lives there are things that we are sorry that we did, but the consequences of them cannot be undone. The one good thing that we find in repentance in Christ Jesus is that Christ is willing to forgive us of those things that we have wronged when we are truly repentant and sorrowful. Verse 39, And Isaac his father answered and said to him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of the heaven from above, and by the sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And so Isaac does give Esau somewhat of a blessing in the foretelling of how he is going to live his life. He is going to live from the land. He's going to live by the sword, but that he will be a servant unto his brother. Isaac would not reverse the blessing that he gave unto Jacob, whether it was through deceit or whether it was through the plan of God. You know, quite often we don't understand how things work out the way that they do. We do know from the very beginning that God had a plan and that He knew through the generations of who it would be passed down through. That the Christ, the promised seed, the Messiah, He knew the generations that it would come through. And as was foretold even before their birth, we knew that it would be through Jacob. Now, did Rachel have to deceive Isaac for that blessing to come unto Jacob? I don't think so. I know that God's plan will always be fulfilled the way that He wants it to be fulfilled. And from the birth, it says that Jacob would be the one who would be the head and not Esau. Rachel had taken upon herself to deceive Isaac. And yet, even if Rachel, I think, my personal opinion, even if Rachel had decided not to deceive Isaac, something would have happened so that Jacob would be the head as God had foretold. Let's look at the second one that is mentioned in Hebrews that we're looking at today. And the second one that we look at is found in Genesis chapter 48. And here we see, again, we are now gone down a generation. We are now seeing what is going to happen with Jacob. Jacob has received a blessing from his father, and now we're going to see what is going to happen to Jacob. Now, in chapter 48 of Genesis, and we are now in the land of Egypt. We know the story of how that all the family ends up in Egypt with Joseph has brought them there because of the famine. And we see a period of time here now that is going to happen. This is chapter 48 of Genesis. And it came to pass after these days that one told Joseph, "Behold, thy father," and this would be Jacob, "behold, thy father is sick." And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob and said, "Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee." And Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. And Jacob said unto Joseph, "God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession." Now, one of the things that is referred to here is that he talks about his father, and there's two names given here. He talks about his father Jacob, and it also talks about that Israel strengthened himself and he sat up on his bed. And Jacob and Israel are the same person. If you remember, if you go back in Genesis chapter 32, that Jacob has a wrestling match in the night with an individual, and when the day is about to break, the individual tells Jacob, said, "Turn me loose," and Jacob says, "I won't turn you loose unless you give unto me a blessing." And the blessing he talks of, he says, "You will no longer be called Jacob, but that you will be called Israel." And of course, this is where we get the term that we refer to the generations to come are the children of Israel, or the Israelites. And so in this text, he uses both names are used. Jacob and Israel are both used at the same time. And so he says he's been told that his father is about to die, and so Joseph brings unto his father, he brings unto him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Manasseh being the older, and Ephraim being the younger. And one told Jacob and said, "Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee," and Israel strengthened himself and he sat up on the bed. And so then Jacob recounts to Joseph how the promise that was also made unto him about becoming a great nation, and that there would be a multitude of people that would come from him. And he's about to talk to him about his sons. Verse 5, and now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Now he says, your two sons that were born to you before I got here, I want you to understand that I will treat your two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, I will treat them as if they are my sons, just like Reuben and Simeon are my sons. Your sons are my sons. In other words, he's going to treat them as if they were his sons and not his grandsons. And thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine. The children that are to come, those are yours, but these two, they're mine. And they shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. And as for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died in the land of Canaan in that way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way of Ephrath in the same in Beth. And he talks about the passing of Rachel and the burying of her. And Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, who are these? And Joseph said unto his father, they are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. And again, here is that blessing coming that is a prophecy of things to come and how life is going to be for them and what the purpose or what the plan is for God in these lives. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see, and he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them, and he embraced them. And Israel, this is Jacob, said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. If you remember, what he's referring to is Joseph was carried off into Egypt as a captive, and if you remember, for many, many years, his father believed that he had been killed. He said, I never thought I would see your face again. And not only has the Lord blessed me to see your face again, I've not only seen you, but I have seen your children. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and he brought them near unto him. So Joseph is anticipating the blessing, and he believes, as would be expected, that Manasseh is going to receive the blessing of the firstborn, and Ephraim will receive the blessing after that. And so since he's facing his father, as we would think would be opposite, he takes Manasseh by his left hand because he's going to present him to his father's right hand. And then he takes Ephraim by his right hand because he's going to present that to his father's left hand. Because the right hand is designated of the firstborn. And so he brings his sons to his father in that manner, so that Manasseh, the oldest, will be at his father's right hand, and that Ephraim, the youngest, will be at his father's left hand. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. So he doesn't reach straight out. He actually reaches across and lays his hand on Ephraim's head, who was the younger. And he reached his left hand out and placed it upon Manasseh's head. And so instead of doing what Joseph thought he would do, Joseph thought that his father would reach forth and place his hands on the two young men's heads like this. His father reaches out and he crosses his arms and he places his hands on the heads of the young men in such a way so that his right hand was on the head of the younger. And verse 17, it says, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head up unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn, put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a great people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And again, not what we would have thought. Another generation removed. It has Jacob being the younger, had received the blessing, and now in blessing his grandchildren, he does the same thing to his grandchildren. Ephraim, being the younger, receives the blessing of the elder and is placed over his older brother Manasseh. And he says that Ephraim will be greater. Just as a side note, as we get ready to go into the land of Canaan and Moses starts numbering the people, one of the things that we see when you see the numbering of the tribes, at that time, Ephraim is 40,500 strong and Manasseh is 32,200 strong. And so Ephraim is already growing at a larger rate than Manasseh and will become that greater nation, and will later on, by the time of the occupation of the land of Canaan and the setting up of those kingdoms, that Ephraim will be the top of the 10 northern tribes. Again, these men, though it may have seemed that they, whether it be through trickery or whatever it may be, these men, when they passed on these blessings as the patriarchs of their families, were the ones who were speaking for God and being the prophet of saying, this is what is to come. And so when we read in Hebrews chapter 11, and we'll read that again. Let's look at verses 20 and 21 again in Hebrews 11. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was a dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshiped leaning upon the top of his staff. How is it that these men are in the list of men of faith? What was it about what they were doing that would put them in a category of this is a thing of faith? When we look at it, the reason that these are considered men of faith is that going back to Abraham and the promise that was made to Abraham, and Abraham is listed here in this chapter also, chapter 11 of the men of faith, that these men had faith that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. That these men look forward to, that as they passed on these blessings to the next generation, they passed on a blessing, and that blessing was knowing that that their descendants would be as multiplied as the sands of the seashores, or that they would be multiplied as the stars in the heavens, and that through their generations there would be a seed that would come that would bless all mankind. And though they did not understand it, maybe themselves, but by faith they passed on that idea from generation to generation. Maybe not understanding why the younger, in both of these cases, why the younger became the one that was over the older, and that the older were under subjection to the younger, and maybe not understanding that that's not the way it's normally done. But by faith, they passed on the idea that God is faithful, and that they continued to pass that on. And by their demonstration into continuing to do and passing on the blessings of knowing that Christ was going to come in generations to come, that they were men of faith because they continued to pass on that idea and the understanding that Christ Jesus would come one day for the salvation of their people and for the salvation of the world. I hope you've been blessed by this study. I hope you've been blessed by looking at these characters and understanding. In our lives, I think there's some important lessons that we need to take away. In our lives, we see here is that let us not trade those things that are of minor value. Let's not take those things and choose those things of minor value over the things that we have such great blessings in Jesus Christ. Help us to understand that we need to know of the value of what has been given unto us as children of God and not trade it for the things of this world. And also the idea of that we may not understand exactly how all things will work out, but we do know that they will work out, and that in the end, God's children will be triumphant no matter what happens between now and then, and no matter how it may appear, that in the end, God's children will be triumphant, and we will remain faithful unto that. Thank you so very much for joining with us.